I actually wrote this talk for a symposium on location, and this was an interesting location. It's actually a very strange location because something like 51 weeks of the year, it's bare desert with alkali sand, high temperatures, and nothing else. No infrastructure, nothing else. And then for about 10 days of the year, something really strange happens. I think it's about 20 or 30,000 people turn up in the space of 2 or 3 days to form a city in the middle of the Nevada desert. And interesting, there's a whole load of reasons why that's interesting. But one of the people I was working with are interested in it because it, to some extent, resembles a crisis situation. So if you think of a refugee camp or something like that, people turn up and live in tents, and there's no infrastructure, and you have to try and support them. Now, this sudden influx of people to bare desert is a really good place to test out those kinds of the modeling, how you could deal with those kinds of things. So literally tens of thousands of people head in across the desert to this place. But actually, it's an art festival. They're not refugees from anything, apart from perhaps real life. They're there to enjoy the Burning Man Festival, which is it's an art festival which is dedicated to I suppose, really the monumental and ephemeral. So nothing is left after the 10 days. It's gone. The desert is returned to its previous state, and there's nothing left. So you may be wondering what this has got to do with Asterisk. Well, actually, it's got a lot to do with Asterisk. Voxeo sponsored it, and in fact, Jose was there. I shouldn't be giving this talk, actually, but anyway, I am. So Voxeo sponsored an experimental mobile phone service to happen in the middle of the desert so that these guys could communicate. But we wanted to try and do something a little bit interesting. We wanted to test stuff about how do you deal with 30,000 people who have different cell phones, different services, and that kind of stuff. But we also wanted to try and do something a little bit special, which I will tell you about in a second. So here's the infrastructure. It's a truck with a satellite connection on the back and a rack, which includes an Asterisk machine, which I'm just trying to work out which of those it is. I think it's the blue one at the top. And then there's an open BTS cell network. Now, I don't know if any of you seen David Burgess from Range Networks do his demonstration of this, but when he does this, he turns up at one of these podiums and unpacks a couple of boxes and then switches on a cell phone network, complete total cell phone network based on Asterisk, that runs a room like this just by switching it on in the corner. Which is and you can run that off a car battery, so it's a kind of totally independent cell network. It needs no infrastructure to run other than itself. And I think that's just of itself, it's a stunningly cool thing to have done. So what we wanted to do was to provide some sort of facilities that referenced the ethos of the place. Now, like I say, Burning Man's an art festival. And people go there to get away from their real lives and go and do something different. So we wanted to have the cell phone network reflect that behavior. So the first thing it does when you roam to that network is it asks you what phone number you want. It doesn't give you one, you get to choose. So you can use your own phone number, your normal phone number, or you can use another one, provided nobody's taken it. So for that week, you can be somebody else, which fits in very much with the kind of style of the place. And then we had the idea that actually, and we got some critique from the guys there that in previous years that they didn't actually want to be contacted by their mothers or their accountants whilst they were out there. So we block all incoming calls. And we also got critique from people who said, well, the spirit of the thing is to engage with other people, really engage with other people and not be yakking on the phone the whole time. So we limited the call length to 5 minutes. We encouraged text messaging because it was fits in better with the style of the place. And but those restrictions seemed a bit harsh. So this year we did something a bit different, which is that we supported outgoing calls to the outside world, so you could ring your car mechanic or your pet sitter to check that the pet or the car was, whatever. And they could then ring you back. So we didn't block all incoming calls. We blocked calls that weren't in response to outgoing calls. So it's kind of, which is where the title came from. It was literally Gnat in the desert for phones. So we were supporting this this style of interaction. And we then did this thing where we did some local apps that ran on the box in the network, in the desert, which were to do with supporting local, information, message boards and that kind of stuff. So locally, local behaviors that were actually attached to the cell and stayed within the cell and never left to the public network. So in the instance that, and this happened fairly regularly, that the internet connectivity had gone, then you could still react amongst yourselves, you could still send SMSs between each other, you could still leave messages on voice boards and this kind of stuff. So we were keen to make sure that the thing ran in isolation as well as interacting with the outside world. So this is a messy diagram we did of it. We had the Voxeo's Tropo on the far left connecting to the outside world and implementing the NAT for phones. I'm trying to work out what else we had. And we queued up the SMSs in case of failures and this kind of stuff. And then at the bottom, dropping off the bottom, is the OpenBTS, and you can see a very bad picture of mine of a cell phone at the bottom right. So, as I say, so to summarize these things, there's choosing your own number on registration, so you get to be who you want to be. We're not going anywhere now. And then the NAT for phones issue that we supported limited, it's 3 minutes, limited calls. SMS within the player was unlimited and free. And that's the other thing. So there's this whole thing about it being very much non-commercial. So all of these calls were gifted by Voxeo. All of the minutes and infrastructure was gifted by Voxeo. There's no money was charged for anybody. And inbound calls were from only recently called people. And likewise, we did the same with SMS. And it was really nice to be able to implement this stuff with Tropo. Tropo's good for, very good for this kind of stuff. You can write in a modern web language to do things like call control routing, SMS, IM, text-to-speech, speech-to-text in multiple languages. I always get this wrong. I think it's 24 languages for speech-to-text and 40 for text-to-speech, but it's that kind of order anyway. And the great thing is that those are written not in an arcane dial plan language, but in a modern scripting language like JavaScript or Ruby or Python or PHP or Groovy, and you get to choose as a web developer. So you don't have to kind of learn a whole new language to do this stuff. And here's an example of how outbound calls worked. So it really is reasonably readable and nicely formatable. I mean, although it doesn't come over as well on the slide because code never does, but it does look like kind of reasonably modern web-ish code rather than arcane, late 80s BASIC, which frankly is what the dial plan looks like to me. Some of you may love it, so At Tropo's, the other thing that was really interesting from Voxeo's point of view is that we used it as a way to prove a point, which is that normally Tropo is a cloud-based service. Most people interact with Tropo as a cloud-based service. They sign up on our web page and they go and use it. But there are instances where you actually want that to be either more private or more managed in your network. And we can run Tropo in your network, or we can supply you with the licenses and put it in your network. But we wanted to do the extreme case. I mean, things like so people like healthcare companies, insurance companies, people who have privacy concerns want to run those things on their internal networks, either for those reasons or just for security reasons, or just policy. But so we decided we'd go for the extreme and see if we could run it not in a rack in a nice data center, but in a rack in a van. And we can, and it does. And that means that if we can do that extreme case, then we can do all of the cases in between. So the thing that that I came out of this experience, was the idea that you could create intelligent cell behavior. You could create cell behavior that related to the users of that cell and to the location of that cell, and meet that community's need. So you're not doing a one-size-fits-all cell network. So the traditional cell networks where you have whatever it is, upwards of 30 million subscribers who all get treated exactly the same, irrespective of where they are. Now, there's strength in that. There's merit in that, but there's also interest in customizing that behavior due to the location they're in. Now, the desert is an absolute extreme for that. There was a clear case what they wanted and whatever, but there are also other instances like, for example, hotels or shopping malls, where you could add value-added services that were to do with the location, but that were delivered from the local cell. And then the other example that I think is interesting, although I haven't really worked through what the legal implications are, is things like finance houses who have compliance issues. You could meet some of those compliance issues by adding behaviors on the cell that meant that particular cell, I don't know, logged all the calls or erased all numbers or all digits in the recordings or whatever, some compliance requirements that you wanted to do, and you could enforce that on a per cell basis, which I think companies are struggling with at the moment. So here are some of the places that I think we could do that. Festivals, obviously. Refugee camps, clearly. You think that refugees won't necessarily have cell phones, and then you realize that one of the people we worked with this on had done a lot of work on Katrina. And the people who left there or who were stuck there or who moved there had working cell phones, but they didn't necessarily have a cell tower to talk to at any particular point. So, and we met, on the follow-up to this, I met one of the deputy directors of FEMA and a guy who was also responsible for the safety planning for one of the, I've forgotten which American city it was, but a large American city. And we were talking about this use case in the desert. And he was looking at the idea of having a cell station in a truck. And one of the guys said, so you mean I could put one of these on each of my city fire trucks? And I was thinking, yeah, well, you could. Why would you? He said, so in a disaster, I can run them out to all the intersections and I have a cell network back? And I'm thinking, that's interesting. You can build an on-the-fly cell network with a set of behaviors that are to do with that emergency that's run temporarily by the city. And once everything settles down, it just goes back to its garage. But you can run that thing out really quickly. And that was interesting. I hadn't considered the mobility aspect of that, of being able to deliver, along with a fire truck, a cell network. So I think that's fascinating. And as I say, shopping malls, I think, offers behaviors, those kinds of things, and phone numbers that are specific to that cell, perhaps, are interesting. So, like I say, I wasn't planning to do this talk, so it's somewhat shorter than the slot. I prepared it for a shorter slot, so I'm now out. I want to thank you for being patient and hearing not what you expected to hear, and I welcome any questions. And Jose can probably answer some more of the I was there questions than I can, because I was sitting typing safely in England.
Cool. I just wanted to add a couple things. Yeah, first off, OpenBTS is not a Voxeo product. It's run by David Burgess as an open source project, so you guys can check it out. This is not something that you need to shy away from, or it's not something that's super difficult. OpenBTS is just software. It runs on any Linux-based computer. Range Networks, which is the company behind OpenBTS, they obviously sell a device that you can buy that has all the antennas and everything kind of built into it. So you basically have a GSM network in a box. But you can download the OpenBTS software, poke around at it. It's based on Asterisk, and it's really great. They obviously welcome contributions and committers and people that are interested in that type of technologies to contribute to the project.
So it's worth pointing out on that even the radio hardware is open source. They're using the USRP. Well, They aren't, but you can use, it supports the USRP with the GNU radio stack. So you can run, you can go out and buy yourself one of those, plug it into an old Linux machine, install the software, and provided that you manage to clear the license constraints one way or another, which is kind of up to you, but there are license constraints because this is license spectrum, you can just run this thing. And I think if you tried, particularly if you reused an existing Linux machine, you're probably out less than $1,000 to do that.
So would it be easier, maybe I missed something. You built out a cell network.
Yep.
Would it have been easier just to build out a big Mene Wi-Fi network over the same space and then run everything zip and...
So there are two reasons why, two things to say there. One of which is that they did, okay, but particularly in a disaster zone and in the third world.
The handheld unit. They got a cell phone in their hand.
Yeah, but the cell phone is, the battery life on an old Nokia is, what, a factor of 50 more than you'll get off any Wi-Fi device.
Right.
And the range of a single cell tower is about 35 kilometers, if you push it. So, you've got range and battery life, which are hugely better than anything you can do with Wi-Fi.
Yep.
And then the cheapness of the device.
Yep.
For $10, I can buy a GSM phone. You won't find a single Wi-Fi.
Yeah,
What?
less than $10.
Okay, less than $10.
Yeah, I mean, I should probably add that as part of the Voxeo's gift, we gifted the minutes, but we also worked with the guys we were working with at Range Networks. They bought 1,000 phones, feature phones, Nokia phones from China Mobile for something like $4,000. So we actually had at Burning Man on Playa, we brought with us 1,000 phones for people that didn't have mobile phones with them, and these things were like FM radios and flashlights in addition to being.
And the flashlight is the single most useful feature.
Yeah, it was. So yeah, real quick, I should also probably plug GWAB, Geeks Without Bounds. It's a nonprofit that Voxeo also sponsors. It's run by Johnny Diggs. He's doing some really amazing work with the guys from Crisis Camp and Geoloki. It's GWAB, GWOB.org.
So they're in the middle of that, and they have the little green...
They're a nonprofit, and they basically do crisis relief and all kinds of great things like that. They sponsor hackathons throughout the country. And the goal of the nonprofit is to build up a set of assets, software assets, and infrastructure around the world to basically be able to respond to any crisis or natural disaster. So what they've done is they'll basically put out a bid for someone to develop a group texting service that could be used in the case of a crisis, or a call blast service that could be used to call out family members and things like that. And they're basically this nonprofit organization is collecting all those software assets, and they're also working with geolocation services to provide disaster relief and things like that. So it's a great project, and if you're actually in a city where they're doing the hackathons, it's just a great time. They usually have some pretty cool sponsors. I know Diggs is working with Yahoo as well. They've offered to donate a bunch of servers and cloud storage and stuff for the projects.
So one of the things there is the idea that you can repossess, and this is one of the things that the deputy director from FEMA was saying, is that you can repossess the management of a disaster instead of being a very much top-down command thing. With these kinds of tools, it can turn much more into a self-help crowdsource thing. People, because he was an ex-fireman, he was really interesting. He was an ex-fireman. When he turns up at a disaster in his fire truck or whatever, there's always somebody else helping first. The neighbors, passers-by are always on hand first. The absolute first responder isn't who you think it is. It's the guy next door. And if you can provide tools that allow them to self-manage and self-organize before the kind of big organized infrastructure turns up, then you can get in that initial critical period where all the damage is done. Sorry, you had a question.
What about CDMA?
Okay, no. Short answer. And there are a number of reasons, one of which is that Range Networks is, and I'm speaking for him with no permission at all. So, like, he may deny all of this. But Range Networks is interested in the 3 billion people who don't yet have cell service reliably. They may have cell phones. It's a mistake to think they don't have cell phones, but they have cell phones that only work when they visit their local city. And all of those are GSM phones. Not a single one of them is a CDMA phone. So Range is interested in that market. And then the other issue, which is much more political, is that the CDMA is covered by a shed load of patents. And it is impossible to implement CDMA in open source.
For those of you guys who don't speak British, he said shitloads of patents.
And I would remind you that the GSM is a French invention.
No, it is not. It definitely is not. No.
So we're dangerously close to time here.